Welcome everyone, thank you so much for coming. We are kicking off our second year of A Taste of History, and a little bit of the background on this program is the Routt County Fair Cookbook came out, and one of the reasons why the museum wanted to be involved and supportive of it and helped co-write a grant for Museum and Heritage Fund grant to help fund it was the idea that food and recipes are a way to capture your family history and local history. I'd like maybe you to raise your hand and let me know, do you have a recipe in your family that's been passed down from someone who came before you that you always cook, that you always love, that makes you think of that person? Maybe even smelling the house full of mincemeat, you're thinking about people who maybe are no longer here, the stories that they told you, and the memories that are captured with that. And with Routt County families, it's going to also be connected to the things that were available here. And so we thought with the advent of the cookbook and the wonderful recipes and stories and families that were captured through the cookbook, that we should celebrate that in a more hands-on way and sensory way. And so this is a way to taste the history and hear about the recipes and share historic cooking methods. So we started this last year. It was very popular and very tasty. And so we decided to go ahead and continue it this year. So we'll be doing 3. It's the third Friday of each month, January 20th, February 17th, and March 17th. There's a flyer on all of your chairs where you can see the dates and the topics. In addition, I just want to point out that we're also doing a film series at the Chief Theater. That's the second Tuesday of each month at the Chief Theater. And we're also doing history happy hours at the Butcher Knife Brewery, which is the first Tuesday of each month. So take a look at that. All of it's on our website. I think the next program to come up actually is for after History Happy Hour is for Valentine's Day, Saturday, February 4th. We're going to be doing Victorian Valentines and tea for kids here. They'll be learning about and creating Victorian Valentines, and that's going to be on February 4th at 11:30. So all of this is on our website. Most, if not all, of these programs are presented to you free, but they do take time and effort and money. And so the way to support these programs and keep them free is by becoming a member. So if you're not a member of the museum, please do become one and support these programs so we can continue to do them and continue to do new ones. If you are a member, thank you so much, and thank you so much for coming. If you have cell phones, if you could silence them, that would be excellent. There are membership slips on your chair. I'm going to pass around this sign-in sheet here. If you're not receiving email information from me, you can put your email address on here, and that is the way you can receive information and updates on all of these programs and exhibits and events. I think I should probably introduce myself. I'm Candace Bannister. I'm the Executive Director here at the museum. Pleased to present this program. I want to thank Tamara and all the gals who have helped put this together, all the people who cooked the pies today, and just really excited about this. So I will pass this off to Karen Massey.
Thank you. It's hard. Well, I am stepping in today for Nancy Mutlow, who did a lot of the legwork and organization. I am Karen Massey, the director of the Extension Office here in Routt County, the Colorado State University Extension Office. I have to say that out of all these beautiful pies that you see back here, I made none of them, and I will tell you exactly why. My first experience making pies for my new family when I got married. I was a dietitian, I was a home economist, I had been a teacher in high school. I made a pie, my mother-in-law made a pie, and everybody raved about her crust, which I later found out that while mine was homemade, hers was Pillsbury. And so I have to admit I took a 20-year hiatus from making pie crust because I was so disgusted that the family preferred hers to mine. And then I realized that really what we need to do is educate people about what a really good pie should look like and taste like. So I just want to take a little poll here before we start our speakers. In your memory, the best pie, what is that about? What makes it the best?
Flaky.
The crust? Okay, so it's flaky?
not skimping on ingredients like pecans, right?
Okay, so it's got a good quality, rich in the really good ingredients like pecans or apples or anything like that. Yeah.
Not overly sweet.
Okay, so not totally a sweet thing. It's got a little bit of texture. It's got a little bit of flavor of whatever is in it.
Some decoration on the crust. I really appreciate
Creativity. Little love put on top. Little decorations, little design.
Not runny.
Okay, so you want the filling to not be runny.
Yeah, that's a crapshoot.
The trick also has to do with not letting the crust get soggy underneath, right? Well, you are going to be experiencing some master pie producers today, and I think many of you out in the audience are also going to be adding to our knowledge about what makes a good pie. We have several people speaking today. First, this is billed as a pie and coffee, so we're going to talk a little bit about coffee, and Tamara's going to give us some input on some of the historic issues with coffee. And then Krista Munger is going to share with us a mincemeat pie experience that her family has had in the Valley for a long time. Todd Hagenboo is going to be talking about his grandmother Elaine Gay's pie experience in his family, and he's also brought banana cream pie.
Yum, Todd.
And then we're going to end it all with Linda Long, who has brought, I don't know if you can see, but she'll be holding it up, all sorts of implements that make a good pie come together in a home kitchen. So with that, Tamara, why don't you get us started here?
I'm up. Okay. Yep. Notice how they didn't ask me to talk about pies. No, I'm just kidding. First of all, yes, most of the recipes came out of this Fair Family cookbook. If you would like to purchase one, we have them here, surprisingly, to purchase. It is an amazing, amazing cookbook, so I highly recommend it. Second thing is, Jacky Grimaldi has her pie recipes back there if you'd like to take those. She also has pie crust recipes that you can take with you. So I'm here to talk about coffee, because what goes better with pie than coffee? You don't sit down and go, I'm going to have a piece of pie and a glass of orange juice. Maybe you do, but most people don't. It's always pie and coffee. Let me give you a little bit of background. I'm going to talk very quickly because I don't want to take up too much pie time. About a little bit of history on coffee. First of all, we came over here from England, and then we got really mad at the English. And so coffee began as a revolutionary sort of protest against the English. You've all heard of the Boston Tea Party. And that was one of the main ways that they did it. They said, to heck with tea, we're going to start drinking coffee. So coffee houses in the Revolutionary War were really magnets for political revolutionaries and political discussions. And we eventually became more of a coffee country and a coffee culture than a tea culture. In 1774, John Adams, when he was going to the Continental Congress, wrote, "Tea must be universally renounced, and the sooner the better." And we basically did. We love tea here, but we really are a coffee society. Pioneers and homesteaders. My gosh, pioneers and homesteaders lived on coffee. They really did. And that included the little kids. So when they were going across the prairie, you brought water with you in case you couldn't find water. If you were lucky, you had a cow, a milking cow, but not everybody had a milking cow, but everybody had some water, some coffee, and usually some whiskey for probably medicinal purposes. But you always had coffee, and everybody drank coffee. It was really a staple of the pioneers and the homesteaders. It kept them warm, and it kept them going. And boy, if you had to walk from Sedalia, Missouri, like most of the Crawfords did, you had to keep going, even if you were a little kid. Everybody in the covered wagon drank coffee except for little tiny babies. Excuse me. And according to the National Oregon Trail Interpretive Center, a list of essentials for any homesteader included 12 pounds of coffee per person and in the wagon, except for babies. And I assume we're talking probably 5-year-olds and up. They started drinking coffee that young because it was a way to keep yourself warm. It was a quick way to make a warm drink. Soup is terrific, but it takes a lot to make soup. Coffee, you just kind of put it together. Julia Breyer, who was a pioneer who crossed the Death Valley, in her diary wrote, "Our coffee was a wonderful help, and had that given out, I know we should have died." And so from a lot of the homesteaders and the pioneers' letters and diaries, we learned that coffee was absolutely essential. The next group that made it absolutely essential were the cowboys. Now, if you can imagine on a day like today, you have to be out with the cows or the sheep. Pretty much in Routt County, it was probably mostly cows. And you cannot look at the weather and go, "I don't want to go to work. Oh my gosh, I'm going to stay in my tent." You had to be out there, and it was cold, and you worked long, long hours because somebody had to be with the cattle 24 hours if they were way out in the middle of nowhere. So you couldn't just come in. You came in, the next people went out. So coffee was really, really essential to keep the cowboys warm, again, to keep them going. And cowboy coffee, in all of the research that Katie, our curator, sent me, sounds like swill. And I think that's part of what makes them, makes it good for them because it wakes them up. It's not only the caffeine, it's the taste. Because the chuck wagon cook, here's how they would make the coffee. They take a 3 to 5 gallon pot, they put some grounds in it, they put some water in it, they put it over an open fire, and they boil it. And it just sat there and simmered all day. When the water got low, or the coffee started to get low because people were drinking it, they didn't make a new pot. They just grabbed some more and threw it in, and grabbed some more and threw it in. And you're talking day after day after day. So eventually, the ratio of coffee grounds to water or to liquid became kind of 1 to 1, and it became this sludge. After it became too sludgish, then the cook would throw it out and start again. But it sat there and cooked and cooked and cooked and cooked and cooked. And another tidbit, according to the Springfield Armory National Historic Collection, fresh coffee was such a morale booster for soldiers, some Sharps carbines, which obviously were rifles, were designed with a coffee mill in the buttstock so that you could make your own coffee out there. I have a very quick part of a short story. This is an absolutely hilarious story. It's from John Rolfe Burroughs. Most of you are familiar with him. He wrote a short story called Come and Get It, which was all about the cooks and being out on the range with the cooks and everything. So Pat Dawson, cook for the Snake River Association, forerunner of the OVO, was a peevish little man who usually had a pipe in his mouth. That's important to remember. He always had a pipe in his mouth. If on occasion, when it wasn't in his mouth, he carried it in the pocket of his shirt. If on occasion the biscuits were tattletale gray, the cowpokes rightly attributed this fact to the ashes from Pat's pipe. Dawson's coffee was as vile as his disposition. And in the research that I read, notoriously, the cooks were picked on by the cowboys. And so they became really nasty human beings because they were constantly being bullied. Pat made coffee in a 5-gallon, in a 5-gallon water bucket. Each morning he tossed a couple of handfuls of freshly ground beans in the top of the old grounds and added water until in time the proportion of liquid of solids by volume was approximately 1 to 1. Bitter as bile and almost as black as coal, the resulting brew was like nothing that ever had trickled into a protesting gullet before. But so gargantuan was the little cook's man complex that he had the entire crew, even including Jens Manson, who it sounded like was a really tough guy, the foreman, buffaloed. No one dared complain to Pat, either about the quality of the food he prepared or the unique character of his coffee. One year, the roundup was about half over when Pat lost his pipe. He was not disposed to suffer this calamity in silence, but in turn accused every man in the outfit, except Madsen, of maliciously and feloniously making away with his pipe. The outfit was long from town, no replacement was obtainable, and Dawson was inconsolable, mourning the only thing on this earth, inanimate or adamant, for which he felt any affection. Someone had stolen his pipe. Just let him get his hands on the dirty so-and-so, and by the living gods he'd cut out his this and that, etc., etc., etc. One more paragraph. Weeks went by, keep that in mind, weeks went by, without bringing to light either Pat's pipe or the pilferer thereof. Then one morning, a cowboy who had rolled out of his blanket on the wrong side, a newcomer who had not been around long enough to be intimidated by the cook, took impulsive action respecting the coffee with a "I'll be damned if I'm going to I can't hardly read it, strangle on any more of that poison." He crossed over to the fire, and in one swift motion, he caught up the coffee pail and dumped it, all of its contents, onto the fire. And it having slipped out of his shirt pocket unnoticed, there was the pipe in the coffee grounds, somewhat bleached out and definitely parboiled, but it was Dawson's long-lost pipe. So his pipe fell into the coffee. It boiled there for weeks, and the cowboys didn't notice because it was such vile, so vile. So, one other interesting thing. If you think about it, coffee over time has gone from being a revolutionary drink to being an essential drink, to being a social drink, and now in our culture it's more of a personal drink. If you think about your moms and dads, my mom and dad, it was always social. Somebody would come over, mom would sit down, she'd have coffee and pie or coffee and cake. My dad would go to the hardware store, he'd have coffee with the guys and talk about politics and all that sort of stuff, but you always sat down and had coffee. After dinner, how many of your parents sat down with coffee and dessert? And if they were my parents, they had a cigarette. Hopefully you guys aren't having cigarettes anymore. But it was always sit down, it was very social. Now it has evolved to very personal. Because if you think about it, you get your cup of coffee and it's got a lid on it. When you bring it to work, you don't take a coffee break. You set it on your desk. When you go shopping, you have coffee there. You see people walking around the supermarket with coffee. When you walk around a mall at Christmas time, you've got coffee. When you're walking up and down, when you're shopping, when you're doing anything, people have coffee. They drive with it. Can you imagine going to your mom and saying, here's what you're going to do. You're going to take this cup, and it's going to be like one of those little sippy cups, and you're going to put the thing on top, and you're going to put coffee in it. And when you go to the grocery store, you're going to walk around with a cup of coffee. And then when you do your shopping, when you go into JCPenney's and all of those, Montgomery Wards, you're going to have a cup of coffee and you're going to walk around with it. Oh, and don't forget, when you do anything else, you're going to have a cup of coffee. Can you imagine what your parents would do? My mother would look at me and go, are you out of your mind? Nobody walked around with coffee. The only time you walked around with coffee was when you had a thermos, right? And even then, you poured it in there, you sat down, and you drank it. But now our culture has become much less social and much more personal. It's not bad, it's just the way things have changed. Luckily, we don't have to drink, hopefully, swill with pipes in it anymore, like the cowboys did. So I'm going to turn it over now to Krista, who's going to talk about mincemeat pie.
Very good.
By the way, I have to thank Katie, our curator, for this information. She is amazing. If you ever want anything researched, talk to Katie, because she'll find anything.
Hello, my name is Krista Munger, and I grew up here in the Valley. And I'm going to talk about mincemeat. And this is a jar of mincemeat that we canned as a family a couple years back. And most of you probably have heard the word mincemeat, but is not exactly sure what's in it. And there is meat in it. The process involves taking some pot roasts, chuck roasts maybe, that aren't as valuable as some of the better cuts of meat, and you grind them up like hamburger. You also, when we did this a couple years back with my grandmother, you go and buy suet. Actually, we didn't buy it. We went to Safeway and City Market because we wanted as much as we could get. Now, suet is the hard back fat off the loins of an animal, and we used beef. Here in Routt County, some people have used venison or elk for their mincemeat, but we used beef for ours. And then the other ingredients are kind of home raised. Well, the beef was as well. The suet came from the store, but then we used currants from the currant bushes around my grandmother's place and my mom's place. We used small little tart apples that come off the apple trees in my grandmother's yard. We bought raisins, and then you grind it all together, like the old kind of the clamp on the table, and you put in the stuff, and you put in a little bit of a little piece of meat, a little piece of suet, some raisins, and you just keep going and you grind it. And then you put it on the stove and you cook it You want to make sure that the meat is cooked, and then it's a process of canning after that. And we canned it all into the cans, into pint jars and quart jars, and that was our mincemeat. Now, the way that I got into this is that we had always had mincemeat pies for Christmas. And about, 10, 15 years ago, my grandmother just passed away last summer at the age of 98. So at the time when she was probably like 80, we weren't getting mincemeat pies anymore. And we made the comment, she goes, well, I'm out. And I'm not cooking anymore. I'm not gonna make it anymore, because it's a lengthy process. And so I'm one of the few in the family that really still likes mincemeat, so if anyone was gonna learn how to do it, it was gonna be me. And my mom is a great canner, so the two of us asked her if we did all the work, would she come into our kitchen and observe and advise and tell us what we were doing wrong or what we were doing right. And of course, that's what she did, and brought the recipe that is forever, been in our family forever, and it came from her family from Iowa. The recipe is in the fair book, and then it is also, the next page is a mincemeat pie. And I don't know if any of you tried the mincemeat pie, but it had a layer of apples on the bottom. That was not what my grandmother did, but to me, the mincemeat is very, very rich. And I liked it to cut it a little bit. And so I put a layer of apples on the bottom and then mincemeat on the top. My grandmother would eat it she'd open sometimes the jar and she'd just have it in her refrigerator. And every now and then she'd eat it out like people do peanut butter. And it is kind of a weird tradition to carry on. I don't think there's many of us that even know what's in mincemeat, but it is something I do really appreciate and am proud to carry on. Are there any questions about the mincemeat?
Did you spice it with anything?
Yes, there's definitely spices. There's like nutmeg, cloves, cinnamon.
Was there any sugar in it?
Oh yeah, there is some sugar in it, and then like some salt as well.
Is there
There's
any
definitely-
liquid added? Or?
Yes, apple juice. Yes, apple juice. Or grape juice, but we used apple juice. Yeah. Jacky?
Kristen, was that canned in an open water bath, or did you use a pressure cooker for that?
We did a water bath. You can do both. The water bath takes longer, of course, but we did process it in a water bath. And I did, I made a note in the fair book when I put it. I got counted down. Has anyone ever put canning stuff in the fair before? They don't open it and they don't taste it, so it's purely presentation. And mine had bubbles in it, and I was like, ah. So you really do have to it takes so much time when you actually put it in the jar when you want to present it to fair. But yeah, that's part of it. Todd?
Kristen, how big a roast did you use and how many quarts of mincemeat does that make?
I want to say we did 4 to 6 pounds of roast, and then it was a slew. Maybe 20 to 25 quarts. Yeah.
Who eats this in your family?
So my family gatherings, we usually make it only at family gatherings, or sometimes when I am asked to do something like this, or I know like an old-time pioneer family would appreciate it, but I don't usually take it to places because it gets wasted. It is a really love-hate type thing, and people don't necessarily want to try it. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I saw the recipe on the bulletin board. It said you cooked the meat first and then ground it, but you guys did not.
No, we ground it all together at
Raw.
once. Thank you. Yeah, here's the molasses. I knew I was forgetting something. Molasses and sugar, nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, ginger. Candace.
So, can you give us a little bit of history, because I'm still trying to grasp, which we're talking in the kitchen, meat in dessert, and kind of where that idea of meat in dessert may have originated.
Well, so mincemeat is very, very old. It is, its roots come back from England, and I don't know, initially it wasn't a dessert. It was like, it was a pie, like a what do they call them, savories? Is that what they call them? And then, if I had to, I'm just purely guessing that someone wanted to see, oh, well, maybe we could make sweeten it up, and then someone's like, this really isn't for dinner, this should be for dessert. I don't really know the history of why it became a dessert rather than a savory dish.
So then maybe just the sugar would be lightened up, but everything else might be in there, and it'd be like shepherd's pie or something like that.
But it has so many, it has currants in it, and raisins, and molasses, and apples. So that kind of makes it more of a dessert type product.
Not necessarily.
You don't think so?
No, because I mean.
But the molasses does.
Yeah, but you cook chicken with all kinds of fruit sometimes.
Yeah, that's true.
And I'm Jewish, and we make brisket with prunes and apricots and.
She just said, I don't know if you could hear in the back. What was the product?
Brisket.
Brisket.
Yeah, and it's a main dish.
With apricots and prunes. Yeah.
There's no wrong time to eat pie. That's the or meat. That's what
So, any other questions?
Well, it seems my mom may have bought it in a can. Would it ever be canned?
You can find it in the grocery store,
Yes.
but it does not contain meat.
Oh, it doesn't.
No.
How many pies does that make?
Well, so this makes the one pie with apples on the bottom. If you want full mincemeat, it's a quart. But like I said, the mincemeat's so strong that I like to cut it down, and so I don't like as much mincemeat in my pie as my grandmother would.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Yeah.
I do want to clarify one thing. In the cookbook, the two recipes that say mincemeat, they have under them in parentheses historic, and that is to reflect the fact that these are long-standing recipes and not necessarily written according to the processes that we would recommend today. So if you were making mincemeat with true meat, the recommendation you would get from any of our master food safety advisors and the extension office would be that this would need to be pressure canned. And there are tested recipes for pressure canning mincemeat. So if you ever do decide you want to do it, please contact us and we'll get you a recipe that has been created for a high altitude and pressure canning. So Todd, do you want to go next?
I'm not going to.
I think you need to. They're recording,
Oh,
so
I can speak really loud.
Yeah.
Okay, can you all hear me if I just talk? I'll project, so I'm afraid I'll blow you all away if I use the microphone. Is that all right, Candace? Okay. So I gotta tell, so I'm Todd Hagenboot. My grandmother was Elaine Gay, and there's a second banana cream pie I wanted to tell you all, so don't be except for the meringue pulled away. And I don't know how many of you make meringue pies, but it happens to me every time, and it never happened to my grandmother. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. I just want to show, it's a little hard to show. And this is also the pretty one. I served you the one that didn't look so good. My children, because I missed out. I didn't learn how to make pie crust from my grandmother as well as I should have. And I don't know how many of you make your own pie crust, but it stinks. I do not, it's tough. And so yesterday, I want to start my children early. They helped me with that pie crust, so it looks a little, it's not as pretty as this one. We'll just say it's that. Thanks, Katie. I just wanted to. I got to tell you a quick story about mincemeat after Krista talked about mincemeat. So back in the late 50s, my grandparents ranched south of town in Pleasant Valley. And my grandpa had been successful in his elk hunt. And something you always did with some of the elk was make mincemeat. And they processed the elk and had, I don't remember what the cut was, if it was brisket or something of that nature, of the elk that was left, about 15 pounds of it left. And they shipped their calves, so my grandmother and grandfather went to Denver to watch the calves sell. And my aunt, who was a senior in high school, she's a contemporary of Jacky's, said, boy, I could really do Mother a favor. I'll make this all into mincemeat. Well, it was 15 pounds, and you heard Krista say that a 4 to 5 pound roast made lots of quarts. She didn't know what she was into. And so apparently when my grandparents came back from shipping the calves, they said the bathtub was full of mincemeat, every pot and pan was full of mincemeat. She'd gone to town, which was a big deal back then, 3 or 4 times. She ended up with about 50 pounds of apples she'd purchased. Yeah, so don't make that mistake. I just wanted to say that about mincemeat. It's a big deal. So my grandmother, Elaine Gay, was well known for her pies. And I think a lot of that comes from the social implications of pie. If you could make a good pie, you always had someone who's willing to thresh grain for you, brand cattle for you, or help in the hayfield, okay? And that was the sign, if you were a good cook, you always had help, and the people who worked on the hay teams or the threshing crews knew who was a good cook, and they knew who was a bad cook. And they did a better job for you if you're a good cook. And my grandmother was a phenomenal cook, not only pies, but breads and meat and potatoes and her salads and all those sorts of things. But what's the most important thing you can do in any new relationship? And that is have a good first impression and a good last impression. And if your crew, the last impression they had was a phenomenal pie, that's what they're going to remember, and when they come back next year, they're going to work extra hard for you. So I think that was part of the reason that she made sure she made really good pies. Pie socials, we were going to talk a little bit about the history of pie. There's a famous quote that's attributed to Marie Antoinette. They say now that really wasn't her that said this, but what is it attributed to her?
Let them eat cake.
Let them eat cake. Well, because she was talking about the peasants, right? Well, shoot, just let them eat cake. No one said, let them eat pie, and meaning it as an insult, because pie is a really special thing. Back in the earlier part of the 19th century, and all the way through the 20th century, the 1900s, mid-1900s, throughout communities in rural America and certainly in northwest Colorado, Linda can probably speak to this a little bit as well, dances were held in the evenings at the schoolhouses or the Grange Hall, and this time of year you really looked forward to getting together with your neighbors. It was a great way to warm up, was to dance, and you had a box supper. People brought their box suppers, and there was a pie social afterwards with coffee. And don't think that there wasn't a little competition if all the ladies were bringing their pies to share with their neighbors. And so another reason why you really did a good job with your pies. My grandmother had an uncanny way of cooking it. She did it before you ever knew that she'd done it. And that's why I said I really missed out on learning how she made her crust. The pie that I made is made with her pie crust recipe. It's a fairly rich pie crust recipe. It's 1.25 cups of flour to 1/2 cup of shortening and a little bit of salt. And of course a little cold water to get to stick together. Most recipes you find, I compared it to my Better Homes and Garden pie crust recipe yesterday. It used 1/3 cup of shortening, not 1/2 cup. Something that I found really interesting as well, pie crust I think is challenging enough. My aunt, my grandmother's oldest daughter, both of her daughters I might say are phenomenal pie bakers, but my Aunt Roberta, who was a ranch wife out in eastern Colorado, was recently asked by a group of young newlywed ladies to come teach them how to bake a pie before the holidays. And so she held a little workshop out in Idalia for about 5 of these young women on how to bake pies. And she was really frustrated before she went to go teach this because she said, in the last year or two, I haven't been able to make a pie crust to save my soul. And if you are a daughter of Elaine Gay and you can't make a pie crust, that's bad deal. And this is very interesting. She did a little research and she found that and I haven't backed this up. I should have had Katie research this to make sure that this is an accurate statement. They've changed the formulation of Crisco to take out partially hydrogenated oils because of health concerns. That means your pie crust doesn't set up the same way as it has for anyone who learned to make pie crust using Crisco. So either use the cheap shortening, which I'm proud to say I did, and that had nothing to do with that. So I went out to buy it because I'm cheap and I buy cheap shortening. And it's chock full of hydrogenated soybean oil. But what she also found was that the good pie bakers have all said, this being the case, the fact that Crisco has changed, let's go back to lard. And lard is the key. And one of the things that I remember Grandma telling me years ago was the best pie crust she ever had, and this is saying a lot because she was a great crust maker, was made by Mrs. Rader. Now, any of you have heard of the Rader Ranch? It's now behind Lake Catamount. Mrs. Rader, who'd homesteaded there, made the best pie crusts. Does anybody know what her secret was to the best pie crust you ever had?
Lard.
What kind of lard?
Pig's lard?
Sorry?
Pig's lard?
Nope, not from pigs.
Sheep.
Not from sheep.
Beef.
Locally sourced by the people back in those days on Bald Mountain. Bear. Bear lard's the best lard you can use for a flaky, fall apart, melt in your mouth, but also stick together crust. So I've always heard this. I don't know if any of you know Suzanne Allen, formerly Crawford. Her family ranched just upstream of Stagecoach Reservoir. This fall, both her husband and her daughter were successful in their bear hunt. And Suzanne rendered the lard from the bears, and she made pie crust this fall, and everyone who tried them said, there is no comparison, best pie crust we've ever had in our life. So now you know the homesteader's secret, as we're talking history, and maybe Linda's got some anecdotes like that too, but that's the key to a really great pie crust, something that sticks together and is yet flaky and delicious, is bear lard. So the next time you know someone who's hunting bear and they're discarding that fat, make sure you procure that as soon as possible. Any other questions about pies and their role in ranching and history? Yeah, Candace.
I gotta take it a step further. So tell us about, so your friend hunted the bear. Tell us about procuring the lard and that process.
So anybody who's rendered lard, you know.
All the way, like, so from hunt to pie.
So once you've skinned,
what's happening with the lard?
Once you've skinned the bear, you take the fat off, the different cuts that you're taking off the bear, and then put in a slow oven, about 200 degrees, on a rack over a container, glass baking dish or something of that nature, that will collect that as it comes out, and that's your lard. And of course, keep it refrigerated would probably be the best thing. Now, they used to tell you to always keep your Crisco or your lard refrigerated to make a good pie crust. I have better luck if I use room temperature shortening. I've not used lard yet, so we'll see.
So you could really take any meat that you've cooked, drain off the juices, and save that. I mean, I know my grandmother used to do that in a can.
You don't take it off the meat you've cooked, like you would a gravy. You take the fat off first and cook only the fat.
Okay.
Linda can probably explain that a lot better than I. I'm getting pulled off the stage. One last question.
So you're cooking that above your pan. Is there anything left over? Or is it all melted through?
There'd be some left.
Where your crackling comes from.
Oh, your cracklings. Thank you, Linda. I couldn't remember. The cracklings are left whenever you're...
Is that the skin?
Too bad.
That's just
Good one, I'll talk to you later.
like membrane almost. Think of it as membrane.
Well, it's like what they do now with chips, the seasonings.
Yeah, you can explain that. Thank you. If you got questions later,
So before we bring Linda up, I just wanted Jackie to say a couple of words about the crust recipe since we're on crusts. Linda has some crust recipes too, but the ones that you were able to pick up in the pile up here.
Well, to me, I'm Jacky Grimaldi. I was raised on the lower Elk River on a ranch I had 5 brothers and sisters, and we had ate lots of pies. And probably my mother always had 3 or 4 going on the table or on the counter at any one time. A cake, my father didn't like cake. Maybe for somebody's birthday you would get a chocolate cake, but that was about it. Her pies the crusts were always made with lard. We had unlimited eggs and cream and what you have on the ranch. She never had a recipe, so I couldn't share any recipes with you.
But these
here are, I compiled 5 different recipes that I use, and I think making a pie crust is one of the easiest things you can do. It's, a crime to go to the grocery store and buy a Pillsbury, but I still do it once in a while. My favorite recipe here is from Lorene Workman, and one a fabulous, fabulous cook, because she was the cook in our high school when I was in high school, along with Linda Long's mother, and we had homemade pies, homemade bread for hot dogs and everything, and great cakes, anything, but she always used a lard recipe. And when she first gave it to me, it started with 5 pounds of lard.
You've pared it down a
I
little bit.
pared it down a little bit. But these recipes, they usually work, and they are very easy. Linda?
I'm Linda Long, and I am from South Routt. I am a fourth generation from being born there and raised. Was also raised on a ranch, and also we always had pies on our counter. I remember the very, very first pie that I made. I was about 9, and my grandmother had broken her hip. We were in Hayen, and we had all the neighbors in, and the way it was traditionally done back in those days was that they would start out at a lower ranch, and all of the cooks would get together, and the ladies would make, whoever ranch they were on, they would make the main part of the meal at that ranch, and then they would bring them in. Everybody else would bring in the pies, or they'd bring in cakes, or they'd bring in the rolls or whatever, and would contribute to that dinner. And as they moved up to the next ranch, it was the same thing, only that lady would do the main meal, and then everybody else would bring in the desserts. So like everybody else has said here today, it was always a real competition about the desserts, or the, I mean, it didn't seem like it really mattered about the main meal. It really did matter about the desserts that was brought in. So everybody really, it was a big competition. And so I was about 9, and it was our turn to have all of them in. And my grandmother had a broken hip and was in the hospital, and my mom was committed to another job at the Mount Elm Bible Camp as a cook. And so she come and got me, and she said, you have to do this. And she set out the menu that I had to cook and everything. And my grandfather loved pie. I mean, it didn't matter what was wrapped around the dough, it was fine. And so he loved pie. So I wanted to please my grandfather, and I didn't make it, thank goodness, for all the whole crew, but I did make this pie for my grandfather. And we had a hired man there, and he was a young man, and he always teased me, and I just didn't really like him. But anyway, I started to make this pie, and the more I worked with this dough, the worse it got. I mean, it was just awful. And the only thing I ended up doing was I scraped the whole thing up off of the counter and just poured it over the top of this pie. And I thought, I just don't know what to do with it. And by this time I'm in tears, and it's just awful. And I had seen in a magazine that my grandmother had there that it was like crumbled up, on top. So I thought, well, I could at least do that. So that's what I did with my first pie. And I hid it when he came home, and my grandfather smelled it cooking in the kitchen, and we had an old cook stove that had the warming oven in the top. So I put it in the warming oven to get it out of sight, because I didn't want our hard guy to see it, because I knew he would just tease the heck out of me. So I was so embarrassed and everything, and I kept telling my grandpa, I said, well, I did make the pie, but we're not eating it. I said, it's just awful. And he said, there can't be anything that bad. And he had raised 4 children by himself, so he knew how all the cooks come along. And anyway, he raved and raved about my poor pie, and the ranch hand, that he started to tease me about it and asked my grandfather, well, what is this? And he said, well, you'll never know. And he just took his pie back away from him. So from then on, I decided, well, I could make a pie. It would be fine. So I brought also some recipes from my cabinet. And my recipe cabinet is, I've got a crust that I will share with Todd that is a no-fail. This one here is from my grandmother, but it has vinegar, it has an egg, and of course the flour, the shortening, a tablespoon of sugar, ice cold water and, a little bit of salt. But the vinegar and the egg is the unusual part about this recipe. I've had it for years, and you can make it up anywhere. I mean, it really is.
Cookbook, Linda?
No, it's not. It's in I just have it here, but I will share it with anybody that wants it. I also have one that has it's made with the lard, and it's got 2/3 cup of lard in it, and it's an old recipe. I think you can still get it on the lard.
Lard is making a comeback.
Yeah, you can get it on the shelf now. So it's a wonderful. I mean, it is so flaky and just really, really nice. So between those are the two that I make. I also have one here for sourdough. So if anybody wants one for sourdough recipes, I haven't used it for a while, but when I did use it, it was really nice and really good. So I've brought some artifacts here that I have from my kitchen, and it's mostly family. I mean, all of it's from family, but it really hasn't changed in all the years. Some of the pie pans are probably from the 30s, 1930s and all, and you can see there's very little difference in what they are buying today. The old Pyrex is still able to be bought today. Most of your tin pans, the only thing different between these and what you're buying today is these are probably twice as thick as what the old ones were, which makes them brown a lot easier and cook a lot better. So I just brought a few things here that comes from my family and their kitchens and everything. I remember as a child also, or as the competition for when you went to the country dances, they would have the box suppers and all, but we never. Our fee for getting in was to do the pie. That was our dessert, and that was how we paid for the band that would come. Is they would take a collection, and the people would buy your pie. Well, it would be totally embarrassing if you didn't make a good pie. So the competition again was on about the pies. We didn't take cakes. We took pie, and so everybody was in real competition about who made the best pie, because of course they brought the most money, and then that was announced in the dance, so it was a prideful thing that you always made a really good pie, and if you couldn't make a good pie, you talked to somebody that did and take it anyway. So but that's what we would do for the dances and all, but we would always do that. So anyway, I've brought some rolling pins also, and I brought this one here, which just is it's an unusual one. It belonged to my mother, but you made noodles with it. And so I just brought it just because, but these are my grandmother's and my mother's rolling pins. But this one was my mom's too, but this is what you would make noodles with. And so I just brought it because I had it there to share it with you. So anyway, those are all there. So is there any questions from anybody else that needed, that would come?
Did the ladies that made the best pies get the most proposals?
Probably. It was always, the way to somebody's heart was through their stomach, so that was always, you wanted to be a good cook.
Linda, back then, what was like the most popular pie, or what was a typical pie back in the 50s?
Well, depended on the year, or the time of the year, but pumpkins, of course, around the holidays was always very good, but your apple and your cherry was your most brought, because that's what everybody had in their cupboards. But there was a lot of people that really, really enjoyed the mincemeats too. So.
Did you ever make strawberry pies?
I've made all kinds of pies that whatever we had that we could put together. Because sometimes you didn't get to town very often, so. By the time that spring come along, you were making whatever you had in the cupboard, to make it taste good. So yeah, we had good pie. So, well, thank you guys for coming.
Just a few more things to talk about. As I was sitting here listening to everybody talk about their wonderful pie memories, I was reflecting on mine. When my mother would bake a pie, there was always little remnants of crust that we would get to put cinnamon and sugar on and bake. And you know, those Pillsbury things, there's no remnants of it. Okay, I've been really hard on Pillsbury. They do have a product that many people enjoy. But I was reflecting on the fact that in my household, we're pie eaters. We're really not cake eaters. And I'm wondering, do you know in the Massey household what they call leftover pie?
Breakfast.
If you are a pie maker, the Master Food Safety Advisors do lots of workshops. If you are interested, please call the office. We'll put together a pie filling workshop because there's nothing that makes making pies easier than having all of the filling already canned that you can just put in the crust. But if you are making pies, there are some things you should consider when you have made that pie and there is some left over. All of the cream pies and the custard pies, anything that has included an egg in the making really should be refrigerated. So the pecan pies, pumpkin pies, custard, any of those really need to be refrigerated. Fruit pies can stay at room temperature for a couple of days, but the rest of them really do need to be refrigerated. I know a lot of people call the extension office and they're unsure about how to care for, ironically, leftover pie. I don't get it. It never happens in my household. But if that happens for you, please make sure that you keep it safe. Is there anything else anybody would like to bring up? I want to thank everybody. Linda, Jacky, Krista, Todd, and Nancy Mucklow, who isn't here, who really put it all together. So I just stepped in, but I'm determined I'm going to make more cake or make more pies. I'm going to have to find a source of bear fat, though. That's clearly the secret. Have a good afternoon.